The air inside the shelter was thick with the smell of old carpets, disinfectant, and exhaustion. Marlene had gotten used to it. After nearly 2 years moving between temporary housing and shared rooms, she trained herself to ignore the flickering lights, the thin mattresses, the food schedule taped on the wall, and especially the questions. People in places like this asked too many questions. She kept her head down. Always had. Ever since she arrived at St. Mary's Community Shelter in downtown Albuquerque with her 6-year-old daughter and 2 trash bags full of clothes, she made it clear she wasn't here to make friends. Survival was the only plan. That afternoon had started like most others. The volunteers had just finished serving soup and peanut butter sandwiches. Ellie was drawing quietly in the corner with a few other kids, and Marlene was folding donated clothes in the back room. A chore she'd taken up not for money, but for a little peace. She didn't mind folding things. Folding things made sense. Life never did. Then the phone rang. The old landline on the reception desk rarely rang. Most residents used their own phones, if they had one. Marlene didn't. She couldn't afford a phone plan. She didn't want to be found. Ruth, the shelter's coordinator, picked up the call. She was a middle-aged woman with a sharp voice and a tired heart, the kind of person who had seen too many stories like Marlene's, but still held on to hope like a religion. Marlene glanced toward her out of habit, expecting nothing. But Ruth didn't hang up. She looked over to where Marlene stood, holding the receiver with both hands. Something about her face changed. Something in her expression tightened. "Marlene," she called out. It's for you." Marlene frowned. That wasn't possible. No one called her here. No one even knew she was here. "Who is it?" she asked, stepping cautiously forward. Ruth covered the receiver with her hand. "She said her name is Judith. She says, she's your mother." The world tilted. Marlene stared at Ruth, not moving. Her throat tightened, her legs numb. "I think you should take it," Ruth added gently. The receiver felt heavy in her hand, cold, almost foreign. She brought it to her ear like someone touching a wound they thought had healed. "Hello," she said. There was a pause on the other end. Then a soft, trembling voice broke through. Aged, emotional, unmistakably familiar. "Marlene, baby, is that really you?" The sound hit her like a wave. A voice she hadn't heard in nearly 20 years. A voice she had tried to forget. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "Oh God," the voice continued. "It's really you. I've waited so long for this. I prayed for this." Her fingers gripped the receiver tighter. Her knees felt weak. She leaned against the wall, staring into the floor like it might tell her what to do. "I'm Judith," the voice said. "I'm your mother. We've been looking for you. We never gave up. And we just want to know you're okay. We want to meet her. Your daughter." That last sentence crushed whatever defenses Marlene had left. Her hand flew to her mouth to keep herself from crying. She squeezed her eyes shut, but a tear escaped anyway. Her daughter, Ellie. Suddenly, she was back in her childhood bedroom in Willow Creek, Colorado. Back in the screaming, the silence, the shame. Back in the moment when she walked out and swore she would never return. And now, after all this time, the woman who raised her, who drove her away, wanted to see her. Wanted to see Ellie. Marlene couldn't take it. Without saying a word, she hung up the phone. Her hand lingered on the receiver for a long moment. She stood there, frozen, until Ruth slowly approached. "What was that?" Ruth asked, careful not to sound too curious. "You okay?" Marlene turned, her eyes glassy but dry. "It was her," she said, her voice thin. "My mother. She found me." Ruth studied her face, then gently gestured for her to sit down. They walked toward the corner of the room, out of sight. "What did she say?" Ruth asked. "She said they want to meet Ellie." Her voice cracked. "She said they never stopped looking." Ruth was quiet for a while. She knew better than to rush people into speaking. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, but firm. "You never told me about your family," she said. "There wasn't anything to tell." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "That's never true." Marlene didn't answer. She couldn't. They sat in silence until Ellie came running over with a crayon in one hand and her stuffed bear in the other. "Mommy, look what I drew." Marlene tried to smile, taking the paper and nodding. "It's beautiful, baby." Ellie climbed onto her lap, completely unaware of what had just happened. Ruth gave Marlene a long look, not judging, not pitying, just understanding. "Maybe," Ruth said slowly, "it's time to face what you left behind." Marlene looked down at Ellie, who was babbling happily about the colors on the page. Her heart twisted in 1,000 directions at once. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew one thing for sure. After that phone call, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. The days that followed the phone call moved like fog. Marlene walked through them without direction, present in body, absent in thought. Her mind was flooded with memories she had spent half her life trying to bury. Every time she looked at Ellie, something in her heart pulled tighter. She knew she couldn't run from this anymore. Ruth, as always, didn't push. But one afternoon, she placed a printed bus itinerary gently on Marlene's bunk, along with a manila envelope containing some emergency cash from the shelter's discretionary fund and a handwritten note. "Whatever you decide, just know you're not alone. Ruth." It took Marlene 4 more days to find the courage to open the envelope. And when she did, the decision was made. She told Ellie they were going on a trip, a small one, just for a few days. The little girl lit up with excitement, bouncing on the mattress with her teddy bear. "Will we see snow, Mommy?" "Maybe," Marlene said, trying to smile. They packed what little they had into 2 second-hand backpacks. Ellie insisted on bringing the pink scarf that Ruth had crocheted for her last Christmas, and her beat-up teddy, the one missing an eye. Marlene didn't bring much, just some clothes, a toothbrush, and a photo of Henry tucked deep inside the side pocket. She didn't tell Ellie where they were going, not yet. Not until she was sure she could face what waited on the other side. The Greyhound station in Albuquerque was old and peeling at the edges, like everything else in their life. But when the bus pulled in, Ellie clutched her mother's hand and beamed. "Are we going far?" "Not too far," Marlene said. "Just across the border." They were heading to Willow Creek, Colorado, a town Marlene hadn't spoken aloud in over 16 years. It wasn't even on most maps. One main street, 2 churches, a diner, and silence. The last time she was there, she had left in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and a secret inside her body. Now she was coming back with a daughter. The bus ride was only a few hours long, but it felt like a lifetime. The road wound through desolate stretches of desert, past empty gas stations and distant mountains that grew taller with each mile. Every bend seemed to carry another ghost from her past. Ellie sat by the window, watching the sky change. She held her bear tight in her lap and swung her feet in the air. "Mommy," she said softly. "Yeah, baby. Do you think the grandmas and grandpas will like me?" Marlene turned to her, startled. What did you say? Ellie shrugged. That lady on the phone. She sounded like a grandma. You said she was your mommy. So, are they my grandmas and grandpas? Marlene's throat tightened. She had no idea how to explain her own parents to a 6-year-old. How do you explain absence, silence, regret? Instead, she placed a hand over Ellie's and gave a small nod. I think they're going to love you, she said quietly. Just like I do. Ellie smiled and leaned her head against Marlene's shoulder. The girl didn't understand the weight of that moment, but maybe she didn't need to. Her innocence was the one thing Marlene wanted to protect more than anything. As the bus climbed into higher altitudes, the sun began to set behind the Rockies, throwing streaks of gold and pink across the sky. The air grew colder. Marlene zipped up Ellie's jacket and watched her fall asleep, her small body curled against her side, the stuffed bear tucked under her chin. With her daughter sleeping peacefully, Marlene turned her gaze toward the window and let the memories come. The creak of the old farmhouse door, the sound of her father's boots on the porch, the cold stare of her mother across the kitchen table the night she confessed she was pregnant, and the silence that followed after she left. So many words never spoken, so much time lost. The bus rolled into Willow Creek just after 6 p.m., as the last light of day gave way to early evening shadows. The station was little more than a bench under a rusted metal awning next to a grain supply store. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, older, but somehow untouched. Marlene didn't stand up right away. She looked at her sleeping daughter and felt her heart pound against her ribs. This wasn't just a trip. This was the beginning of a reckoning. And whether she was ready or not, the past was about to open its door. The bus hissed to a stop with a soft jolt, waking Ellie with a sleepy groan. She rubbed her eyes and blinked up at her mother. Are we here? Marlene nodded slowly. Yeah, baby. We're here. The town of Willow Creek hadn't changed much. The air was colder than she remembered, thinner too, like every breath carried with it the weight of things unsaid. The streets were quiet, framed by faded storefronts and chipped wooden signs. A pickup truck rumbled past, and somewhere in the distance, a wind chime danced softly. The driver pulled their bags from the storage compartment. Marlene thanked him quietly, slinging one strap over her shoulder and holding Ellie's hand with the other. The little girl looked around with wide, curious eyes. It's so quiet here, she whispered. It always is, Marlene said, more to herself than to Ellie. They crossed the small parking lot toward a long bench that sat beneath an old maple tree, its branches now bare with early winter. And there they were, two figures standing just beyond the tree line, waiting. Judith was shorter than Marlene remembered. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose bun, her coat buttoned up to her neck. She stood with both hands wrapped tightly around the strap of her purse, like she wasn't sure what to do with them. Beside her stood Bernard, tall, broad-shouldered even in old age, his grey beard neatly trimmed. He had always been a man of few words. That hadn't changed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marlene felt her daughter's fingers tighten around hers. She looked down to see Ellie staring at the couple. Is that them? Marlene nodded. Yes. Judith stepped forward first. She walked like someone crossing a fragile bridge, slow, careful, unsure if it would hold. Her eyes shimmered with tears she wasn't trying to hide. When she reached them, she stopped just a foot away, looking at Marlene like she was seeing a ghost. My God, she whispered. You look so much like him. Marlene didn't speak. She didn't know how to. But Judith didn't wait. Her voice cracked as she took a trembling step forward. Marlene, I am so sorry. For everything. For every year, every silence, every word I should have said and didn't. Her lips quivered. I never stopped missing you. Not for 1 second. It wasn't the kind of apology that erased pain. But it was real, raw, honest. Marlene's eyes burned. She felt like she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, like the moment was too big for sound. Then Ellie looked up at her and said softly, "Can I say hi?" That broke the silence. Marlene gave a small nod, and Ellie stepped forward, staring up at Judith with the pure curiosity only a child could have. "Are you my grandma?" she asked. Judith covered her mouth, sobbing as she knelt down slowly in front of the girl. "Yes, sweetie," she managed. "Yes, I am. And I'm so happy to meet you." Ellie didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around Judith's neck and hugged her like she'd known her forever. It was a hug that said everything Marlene couldn't. Bernard approached more slowly, his eyes locked on Marlene with a quiet intensity. He didn't cry. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder and said, in a voice low and gruff but thick with emotion, "It's good to see you again, Marlene." She swallowed hard and nodded. "You too, Dad." It was the first time she had called him that in nearly 2 decades. They didn't hug. Not yet. But something passed between them, something old and broken, but not dead. A start. Judith stood up, still holding Ellie's small hand. "We made up your old room. I wasn't sure if you'd want to stay, but it's there, if you want it." Marlene looked at her daughter, then at the house across the street, a modest farmhouse with a crooked porch and warm light glowing from the windows. The same one she had stormed out of when she was just 17. She gave a slow nod. That night, as they crossed the threshold, Marlene felt like a stranger walking into a memory. But for the first time in a long time, she also felt something else. Hope. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine wood. That scent, subtle, comforting, painfully familiar, hit Marlene the second she stepped inside. It hadn't changed. The wallpaper in the hallway was still the same pale yellow with tiny blue flowers. The wooden floor creaked in all the same places. On the wall by the staircase, the same row of family portraits remained, though the glass was now a little dusty. Marlene stopped in front of one photo in particular, her senior portrait, taken just a few months before she left. Her smile in the picture looked frozen, forced, like a girl trying hard to convince the world she was okay. Ellie tugged gently at her sleeve. "Is that you, Mommy?" "Yeah," Marlene said, her voice barely a whisper. "A long time ago." Judith offered to show Ellie to the guest room, freshly made with patchwork quilts and stuffed animals that had been pulled out of storage boxes. As they disappeared up the stairs, Bernard cleared his throat from behind Marlene. "You want to sit out back for a minute?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. Marlene followed him through the kitchen and onto the back porch, where 2 old chairs faced the wide yard. The garden had gone wild over the years, weeds tangled in the rose bushes, the grass grown too tall in places, but there was something comforting about its imperfection. It felt honest. Bernard sat first, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped. Marlene took the other chair, the silence between them stretching like a tight rope. For a while, neither spoke. The sky overhead was dusted with stars, the kind of sky you only saw away from cities. Vast, quiet, ancient. Then Bernard exhaled, slow and heavy. "I was too hard on you," he said. "Back then. I didn't know how to handle it. You were 17, pregnant, and I thought I could scare you into making better choices." Marlene stared out at the field. "You told me I was a mistake." "I know," he said, his voice gravel now. and I've regretted those words every day since." She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just nodded, absorbing the weight of the confession. "I made mistakes too," she finally said. "I shut you both out. I thought I had to do everything on my own, just to prove I could. But I was scared, and I was hurting." Bernard looked over at her, his face lined with age, eyes moist. "I never stopped wondering where you were, or if you were safe. I wanted to call. I just didn't think I had the right." "No one did," she said softly. They sat in silence again, but this time it was different. Not cold, not heavy, just quiet, healing. Then Bernard did something Marlene hadn't expected. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small pocket knife. The handle was worn and carved with initials, H.B., her late husband's. He held it out to her. "Henry left this in the garage the last time he was here," Bernard said. "Said he'd come back for it." He paused. "He never did." Marlene took the knife with shaking hands. She hadn't seen it in years. She traced the initials with her thumb, her breath catching. "I still dream about him," she murmured. "Me too," Bernard said. That was the most they'd ever shared about Henry, the most human moment between them in years. Inside, the floor creaked above them, the soft sound of Ellie's footsteps as she explored the house. Bernard stood slowly. "We can't fix everything, but maybe we can build something new." Marlene looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and walked back inside. She stayed out there a little longer, holding the knife in her hands, staring at the stars. She thought about the past, about choices, mistakes, words left unsaid, and then she thought about Ellie, asleep in the room where she once cried herself to sleep as a girl. This place held so much pain, but maybe, just maybe, it could hold healing too. Behind her, Judith's voice called softly from the doorway. "I made hot chocolate," she said. "She asked for marshmallows." Marlene smiled, standing up. Of course she did. And for the first time in years, she stepped inside her parents' home not as a runaway, not as a daughter lost, but as a mother found. Morning in Willow Creek came slowly. Light poured through the thin curtains of the old farmhouse, brushing the wooden floor with soft golden hues. Birds called from the trees outside, and the distant hum of a tractor reminded Marlene just how far she was from the noise and chaos of Albuquerque. She had barely slept. Downstairs, she could hear Judith humming softly in the kitchen, the same tune she used to hum when folding laundry, back when Marlene was still a child, still unbroken. The sound stirred something warm and painful inside her. She sat up, brushing the sleep from her eyes, and looked at Ellie, still curled beneath the handmade quilt, hugging her teddy bear tightly. For a moment, Marlene let herself believe they had always lived here. Then the phone rang. Not the house phone. Her phone. Ruth's number flashed on the screen. Marlene slipped into the hallway to answer, heart already tight. "Hello, Marlene," Ruth said, and there was a kind urgency in her voice. "I didn't mean to interrupt your visit. I needed to call. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing bad. Actually, it's good. I've been on the phone all morning with the city coordinator. We managed to get you approved for that new transitional housing program. It's an apartment, Marlene, in a good neighborhood. A real place for you and Ellie. And there's a job opening connected to the program, part-time to start, but it's stable." Marlene leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. She felt her stomach twist. This was what she had wanted, what she had been waiting for. A real chance. A future. You'd have to be back by Thursday to sign the paperwork, Ruth added, quieter now. They won't hold it past that. Marlene didn't speak. Her hand tightened around the phone. I know this is hard, Ruth said gently, but I couldn't not tell you. After they hung up, Marlene stood there in the hallway, listening to the sounds of the house. Judith clinking dishes, Ellie giggling upstairs. This place had just started to feel like home again, and now it was already asking her to leave. That evening, after dinner, she sat on the porch steps while Ellie played in the yard, chasing the orange tabby cat that wandered over from next door. Judith came out with 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her. You've been quiet today, she said softly. Marlene nodded. I got a call. Judith waited. It's Ruth. From the shelter. She said they got me into a program back in Albuquerque. It's real, Mom. An apartment. A job. Something that's mine. Judith took a breath. And you'd have to leave? Marlene nodded again, eyes fixed on the horizon. By Thursday. There was a long silence. Judith sipped her tea, then said, without hesitation, Then you should go. Marlene turned to her, startled. What? You should go, Judith repeated, her voice steady. You've worked so hard. You've fought for everything you have. You deserve that chance. But I just got here. Judith placed her hand gently over Marlene's. Sweetheart, I want you here. Every part of me wants that. But I will never stand in your way again. If your path takes you back, I'll wave you off from this very porch. And if it ever brings you back again, I'll be right here waiting. Tears welled in Marlene's eyes, and she looked down, her voice cracking. I didn't expect you to say that. Judith smiled faintly. That's the thing about forgiveness. Sometimes it surprises both of us. In the yard, Ellie laughed as the cat leapt over a patch of grass. And in that moment, Marlene realized something she hadn't felt in years. She could choose, without guilt, without fear, without losing herself. It wasn't about choosing one home over another. It was about believing she was allowed to have both. The next morning arrived with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The fog hovered low over the fields behind the house, softening the edges of everything. Bernard had already been up for an hour, moving around in the backyard workshop, his quiet rhythm unmistakable. The creak of the old wooden door, the clink of tools, the steady grind of sandpaper on wood. Marlene found herself drawn there, barefoot, still in her pajama pants and sweatshirt. Ellie was inside helping Judith make breakfast, or more accurately, scattering flour across the kitchen while pretending to know what she was doing. The workshop sat at the edge of the property, its paint peeling, the windows fogged with age. But inside, it smelled of cedar, varnish, and memory. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Sawdust blanketed the floor like snow. A half-finished rocking chair stood in the center, a piece of craftsmanship so precise it felt like art. Bernard stood hunched over a workbench, wearing a worn flannel shirt, his thick hands moving with quiet certainty. Marlene leaned on the doorway, watching him in silence until he finally spoke. Didn't think I'd ever hear that back door open with you behind it again. She smiled faintly. Me neither. He turned and gave her a small nod. Come in. I want to show you something. She stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything. It felt like a sacred space, the only place where her father had always seemed calm, patient, different. On the bench beside him lay a small wooden box, unfinished, but beautifully carved. The top had delicate floral details, and a hollow in the center where something was meant to be inlaid. I started this the week you left, Bernard said. Didn't know why. Didn't know what for. Just Needed to keep my hands busy, I guess. Could never bring myself to finish it. Marlene reached out and gently ran her fingers along the edge. It's beautiful. He looked down at her hands. The same strong fingers, the same careful movements. You always liked this stuff when you were little. Used to sneak in here and play with the clamps. She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. I thought they were little robots. Bernard's eyes softened. He hesitated, then took a deep breath. I'm not good with words. Never have been. But if you decide to stay, or even just come back someday, I could use a hand in here. Marlene blinked. What do you mean? I'm getting old. My knees aren't what they used to be. Eyes either. But I've got orders from town that keep coming in. People still want custom stuff. Chairs, cabinets, toys for the church raffle. I can't keep up. He looked at her, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. You've got the hands for it. The eye. The patience. You and me. We could build something together. Marlene's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this. She thought the past was too broken for bridges. But here he was, offering one with wood and nails instead of words. She looked around the workshop, letting the air settle in her lungs. 4 years she'd fought alone, struggled to survive. Now, someone was offering to build with her. Not for her, not despite her, but beside her. I don't know, she said honestly. I still have to figure things out. I know, Bernard said. No pressure, no guilt. Just think about it. He picked up a sanding block and passed it to her. She took it, stared at the grain of the wood, and felt something quiet inside her start to shift. For the next hour, they worked side by side in silence, sanding, measuring, adjusting. Nothing big was said. Nothing had to be. From the kitchen window, Judith watched with watery eyes, her heart full at the sight of the daughter she'd lost and the husband who had never known how to say, I miss you, both rediscovering each other, not with words, but with work. When breakfast was ready, Ellie burst through the back door, flour in her hair and syrup on her sleeves. Mommy, Grandpa, pancakes are ready. Marlene looked up at Bernard, who smirked beneath his beard. I taught her everything she knows, he said. Marlene smiled. That explains the mess. She followed Ellie back toward the house, holding the sanding block in one hand. A small, simple thing. But it felt like something more. Like the start of a future she hadn't dared imagine. If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. It was the kind of afternoon where the air felt heavy with memory. The sun was beginning to lower over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the porch. Marlene was inside folding laundry when the knock came. 3 slow taps on the front door. She didn't recognize the rhythm. Judith called out from the kitchen, I'll get it. But something in Marlene told her to go. When she opened the door, a man stood on the porch, somewhere in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. He had sun-worn skin, a tired denim jacket, and eyes that carried the weight of too many roads. He held a small leather bag in one hand and a nervous kind of sadness in the other. Hi, he said, giving a soft smile. You must be Marlene. She tensed. I am. He nodded, adjusting the strap on his shoulder. Name's Walter. I knew Henry. Your husband. The name struck her chest like a blunt object. Walter looked down, respectful of the silence that followed. We worked together. Long time ago. I lived in Amarillo back then. Henry and we played music together, mostly small gigs. He talked about you a lot. Marlene's lips parted, but no sound came out. Walter reached into his bag and carefully pulled out a sealed envelope and a small cloth-wrapped bundle. He held them out with both hands. Before he passed, he asked me to find you. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should get these to you. Took me a while to track you down, but I made a promise. Her hands shook as she took the items from him. She nodded, trying to hold herself together. Thank you, she whispered. Walter hesitated, then gave her a gentle nod and stepped back. I'll be around for a few days. Got a room at that little motel by the gas station if you want to talk. She watched him walk down the path and disappear into the street before she closed the door behind her, her heart racing. She sat at the edge of the couch and slowly opened the envelope. Inside were a few sheets of worn paper, handwritten sheet music, barely legible, titled "For Ellie." Below the title, in Henry's familiar handwriting, were half-written lyrics, smudged in places, unfinished. Her breath caught. He had started writing a song for their daughter. She unwrapped the second item carefully. Inside the cloth was a small wooden pendant, carved in the shape of a guitar. The wood was smooth, sanded with care, and there were tiny initials burned into the back, H+M. It was something he had made by hand. She knew that immediately. Henry had always been good with his hands, with music, with carving, with the things that required quiet attention. Judith stepped into the room, drying her hands on a dish towel. Everything okay? Marlene couldn't speak yet. She turned the pendant over in her palm again and again. Walter was a friend of Henry's, she finally said. He brought something Henry left behind. Judith walked over slowly, sat beside her. Marlene placed the sheet music on the table, and they both stared at it in silence. The title, "For Ellie," seemed to shimmer. Did he ever know her? Judith asked gently. No, Marlene said. I told him I was pregnant, and then I disappeared. He looked for me. I know he did. But I was too proud, too angry. I thought I was protecting Ellie from more pain. You were protecting yourself too. Marlene blinked back tears. Later that night, after dinner, and after Ellie had brushed her teeth and begged for one more story, Marlene knelt beside her bed, the little pendant in her hand. I want to show you something, she said. Ellie sat up, curious. Marlene placed the pendant in her palm. It's from your daddy. He made it. Ellie stared at it, wide-eyed. He made this for me? Marlene nodded. He started writing a song for you too. He never got to finish it, but he was thinking about you. He loved you before he ever met you. Ellie held the pendant to her chest and whispered, Thank you, Daddy. Marlene tucked her in and turned off the light, but stood in the doorway a little longer, watching the soft rise and fall of her daughter's breath. There had been so many things taken from them, time, words, chances. But this was something given. And sometimes, even the smallest gifts from the past carried enough light to open new doors. For the next few days, something shifted in Marlene. The house felt warmer. The silence between her and her parents wasn't so heavy anymore. Ellie laughed more, louder, freer, filling the old farmhouse with a life it hadn't known in years. And yet, there was something still stirring beneath the surface, something that wouldn't let Marlene sleep. The unfinished song. It sat on the nightstand beside her bed, the pages yellowed and creased. The title, For Ellie, stared up at her every morning like a quiet promise, waiting to be fulfilled. Henry had started writing a melody for the child he never got to meet. It was incomplete, fragile, but alive. And now, it was in her hands. Marlene hadn't played music in years. After Henry died, she packed away her guitar, her notebooks, all of it, convinced that if she let herself feel what those strings stirred in her, she might fall apart. But now she had a daughter who deserved to hear her father's voice, even if only through a song. And so, she began. She asked around the town and eventually met Calvin Ortega, a soft-spoken man in his 30s who worked at the feed store by day and played guitar at the community center on weekends. He had a studio in his garage. Nothing fancy, just a keyboard, some mics, and an old computer. But when he heard the story, he didn't hesitate. "I'll help you," he said. "We'll finish it together." Every afternoon, after Ellie's homeschooling lessons and before dinner, Marlene walked with her daughter through the winding streets of Willow Creek to Calvin's garage. At first, she was nervous. Her fingers fumbled over the strings. Her voice cracked. But little by little, the music came back. The melody grew. Henry's scribbled chords turned into something full and tender. The lyrics, delicate, honest, came from somewhere deep inside her. Words she had never spoken out loud. Words she wasn't brave enough to say until now. "You were the light I didn't know I needed. The hope that came when I thought I had none. You are every part of him I still carry. You are the reason I stayed standing. You are my Ellie. You are his song." Calvin listened in silence, then nodded. "That's it. That's the heart of it." One evening, Ellie came with her, sitting quietly in the corner, legs crossed, bare in her lap. Marlene looked at her and knew the song wasn't just for her daughter. It had to be sung with her. She handed Ellie a mic. The little girl's eyes went wide. "Me." Marlene knelt beside her. "It's your song, baby. If you want to sing it with me, we can share it together." Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, Mommy." The next few weeks became a whirlwind of rehearsals and recordings. Word started spreading through town. People heard about the song, the story, the mother and daughter working through grief and memory to turn pain into something beautiful. Then, one afternoon, Judith came home holding a flyer. "There's going to be a small music festival at the church green next Saturday," she said, placing the paper on the table. "They're asking for local performers." Marlene stared at the flyer. Ellie tugged her sleeve. "Can we, Mommy? Please? I want them to hear Daddy's song." She couldn't say no. The night of the festival, the small crowd gathered under string lights and stars. Families sat on blankets. Children ran barefoot across the grass. The makeshift stage had a simple wooden backdrop and 2 old microphones. Marlene stood backstage, heart pounding. She looked down at Ellie, who was holding the guitar pendant around her neck like it was a shield. "You okay?" Marlene asked. Ellie nodded, firm. "He's here with us." That was all she needed to hear. When they stepped onto the stage, the crowd hushed. Marlene took a deep breath and spoke into the mic. This song was written by someone who never got to meet his daughter, but he loved her more than anything. "We finished it for him." Then she looked at Ellie. Together, they began. Their voices, one soft and seasoned by pain, the other sweet and full of wonder, blended like threads in a tapestry. The lyrics carried through the night air, wrapping around everyone listening, reaching into the quiet corners of their hearts. By the final verse, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Judith cried quietly, holding Bernard's hand. Calvin watched from the side, smiling with pride. And when the song ended, the applause came like thunder. Long, warm, real. Marlene and Ellie stood side by side, breathless, glowing. Not from stage lights, from something deeper. A healing. That night, back at home, Ellie fell asleep holding the guitar pendant, her voice still humming the last notes of the song. And Marlene sat on the porch alone, looking up at the stars. She didn't need to say it out loud. Henry was there, not as a ghost, but as music. And music was eternal. Winter had begun to settle over Willow Creek. Frost kissed the edges of the windows in the early mornings, and the trees stood bare and still like quiet witnesses to something sacred. Life had slowed to a gentle rhythm. Days were filled with small routines: homeschool lessons with Ellie, sanding wood in the workshop with Bernard, and helping Judith prepare dinner while the old radio played songs from another era. But that peace was shattered, in the most unexpected way, by a phone call. It came late in the afternoon, just as Marlene was folding laundry in the living room. Ellie was upstairs reading, and Bernard was in the garage tuning a broken radio he insisted could still be saved. The landline rang, a sound that no longer startled her, and Judith answered from the kitchen. "Marlene," she called out, holding the phone out with a strange look on her face. "It's for you. Someone from New York." Marlene frowned, wiping her hands on her jeans. New York. She took the phone, pressing it cautiously to her ear. "Hello." The voice on the other end was bright, professional, and a little breathless. "Hi. Is this Marlene Reyes? I'm Elena Spencer, producer and cultural coordinator for Stories That Travel, a national community arts initiative. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Marlene blinked. No, not at all." "Great. I know this might sound sudden, but we've been following the story of your performance at the Willow Creek Music Festival. The song, the story, you and your daughter. It's been shared online dozens of times. Someone recorded the whole performance and uploaded it to our community archive. It's touched a lot of people." Marlene sank slowly into the couch, heart thudding. "It was just a small performance." "Maybe," Elena said gently, "but it's the kind that matters. Real, honest. And we think it needs to be heard by more people." There was a pause. Marlene didn't dare breathe. "We'd like to invite you and Ellie to be part of our upcoming national tour. 10 cities, all across rural communities. We focus on real stories that inspire healing. You'd sing, share your journey, talk about Henry, about resilience, about what you've been through. We'll take care of everything, travel, lodging, everything you need." Marlene was silent for a long time. "A national tour?" Elena seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to answer now. We'll send you all the details by email. Just think about it. What you and your daughter shared. It could help a lot of people." They said goodbye, and Marlene slowly hung up the phone, her mind spinning. Judith looked at her from across the room. What was that about? Marlene turned, stunned. "They want us to go on tour. Across the country." Judith's eyebrows lifted, but she said nothing. Later that night, after Ellie had washed up and was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, Marlene sat beside her and gently broke the news. "Sweetheart, remember the song we sang at the festival?" Ellie turned, eyes shining. Everyone clapped so loud. Marlene smiled. "They really loved it. So much that a group from New York wants us to sing it in other places, other towns, for people who need to hear it." Ellie didn't say anything right away. Then she asked, "Would Grandpa and Grandma come too?" Marlene shook her head. "No, they'd stay here. But we could talk to them every day. And we'd be together. Like always." Ellie looked down at her lap, quiet. Then, without lifting her eyes, she said softly, "I think Daddy wants us to go." Marlene's breath caught. "Yeah." Ellie nodded. "His song is still moving." That night, the family sat around the kitchen table. The mood was heavy with uncertainty, but there was also pride. Bernard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You'd be safe, taken care of. They promised, Marlene said. Every stop planned. Security. Comfort. Everything. Judith poured more tea and gave Marlene a long, warm look. Then you should do it. For you. For her. And for him. Marlene stared down at the flyer Elena had emailed, a map with dots across America, places she'd never been, faces she hadn't met. For so long, her life had been about survival. Now, for the first time, it could be about something more. Sharing pain. Transforming it. Letting Henry's love live beyond the boundaries of this small town. That night, she said yes. And a few weeks later, they were gone, with 2 suitcases, a guitar, a pendant, and a purpose. The final show ended just after 9 p.m., but the echoes of that last song lingered long after the applause faded. Marlene stood motionless for a moment, her eyes closed, letting the silence of the auditorium wash over her like warm rain. Ellie, still holding her mother's hand, grinned from ear to ear, cheeks flushed, hair a little messy from all the excitement. The crowd had risen as one, not out of politeness, but because they felt something. Something real. Something human. Dozens of strangers came up afterward to hug them, to whisper thank yous, to share tears and fragments of their own pain. One woman in Mississippi had lost her daughter to cancer. A teenage boy in Kentucky had grown up without knowing his father. An elderly man in Missouri had never told anyone that his wife used to sing to him every night, until she died in silence. People didn't just listen to for Ellie. They felt it. They connected to the broken places in it. The unfinished notes. The words that trembled when Marlene sang. The pure, unwavering voice of Ellie when she picked up the final chorus, as if singing directly into the soul of every person watching. The tour had been more than music. It had been a movement of healing, stretched across 10 towns and hundreds of hearts. That night, in their last hotel, a modest 2-story in just off a quiet road in Savannah, Georgia, Marlene sat by the window as Ellie slept curled up in the bed behind her. The pendant Henry had made, now worn smooth and a little chipped at the edges, hung from Ellie's neck like armor. She never took it off, not even to sleep. It had become part of her, not just a memory, but a connection. Outside, the moonlight spilled across the empty parking lot. Marlene opened her notebook, the same one she'd used to finish the lyrics, and began writing a letter. Not one she planned to send. Not to anyone alive. It was for Henry. We did it, she wrote. Your song found its way through the world. She sings with you in her. Every single time. I see your smile in her eyes. Your kindness in the way she treats strangers. And your courage in the way she stands on stage, unafraid. I don't think I was ever really alone, Henry. I think you stayed with us. In every note. In every moment I wanted to give up and didn't. She stopped writing, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I wish you could have seen her. But maybe you already do. She closed the notebook and looked back at Ellie, asleep with her arm around the stuffed bear she refused to retire. She had grown so much, not just taller, but deeper, braver, the kind of child who carried the past without being crushed by it. In the morning, they would be going home. Willow Creek welcomed them with a quiet blanket of snow. The bus rolled in slowly through the narrow main road. The familiar sights passed by. The old diner with the neon open sign still flickering after all these years. The grain store with the same faded mural. The crooked mailbox that Marlene used to pass every day as a teenager. But now it felt like a different place. Not because the town had changed. It hadn't. But she had. As the bus slowed in front of the stop, Marlene spotted 2 figures waiting near the maple tree, bundled up in thick winter coats, scarves wrapped around their necks. Judith and Bernard. Judith was waving, both hands high in the air like a child too excited to be still. Bernard, ever stoic, had his hands shoved in his pockets, but even from the window, Marlene could see the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Mommy, they're here," Ellie shouted, pressing her face against the glass. Her legs bounced with excitement. They stepped off the bus and were immediately swallowed into hugs, the kind that didn't need words. Judith cried before Marlene even said hello. She held her daughter's face in both hands and just stared at her, overcome. "My God, you look like you've been to the moon and back," she whispered. Bernard pulled Ellie into his arms and lifted her slightly off the ground, something he hadn't dared do before the tour. She giggled, hugging him tight. "I missed your pancakes," she said. He chuckled. "That's what brought you home, huh?" They all laughed, the cold air biting at their cheeks, but none of them feeling it. Back at the house, the warmth enveloped them immediately. The smell of cinnamon tea, the sound of the kettle whistling, the creak of the floorboards beneath familiar feet. The same house that once held Marlene's pain now felt like it held her return. They unpacked slowly. Judith had left a welcome basket in Ellie's room, homemade cookies, a new notebook, and a hand-stitched pillow that read, "Welcome home, brave girl." In the living room, the photo wall had changed. There was now a new frame, a picture taken backstage in Kansas City, of Marlene and Ellie Midlaff, arms around each other, guitar between them. Below it, a small wooden plaque read, "The song that found us." That night, they all gathered around the dinner table. The same table that had once been the setting for arguments and silence was now full of laughter, food, and the clatter of forks against real plates. Ellie told stories with her mouth full, about the woman who taught her a lullaby in Tennessee, about the boy who gave her a drawing in Arkansas, about the man who cried and hugged her without saying a word in Oklahoma. Judith sat quietly, hand over her heart. Bernard reached over once and squeezed Marlene's hand without looking at her. It was their way now. Later, when the dishes were done and Ellie was tucked into bed, Marlene stepped out onto the porch alone. She wore Henry's old flannel. It was a little big, a little frayed, but it still smelled faintly of cedar. Snow fell softly, dusting the porch rails. In the field beyond, the trees stood tall and silent, like sentinels keeping watch. She sat in the chair she had helped Bernard build, the one she had sanded with her own hands, and let her body rest for the first time in what felt like years. Then the door creaked. Ellie stepped out, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket. She sat on her mother's lap, head against her chest, small fingers curling around Marlene's. "Do you think Daddy saw us?" she asked. Marlene looked up at the sky, stars shining sharp and clear. "I don't think he missed a second." Ellie smiled. "I felt him. Every time." "I did too, baby." They sat there in silence, mother and daughter wrapped in a shared warmth that came not just from the blanket, but from all they had carried and survived together. Marlene had left Willow Creek as a runaway girl full of fear. Now she had returned as a woman, a mother, a storyteller, and most of all, a survivor. She no longer needed to escape the past, because now the past had become part of her music, and music, when born from truth, never fades. And if you liked this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.